Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of werewolf horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. There is a werewolf wandering around the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It has taken me a while to collect my thoughts and be able to recall all of this. By now, at least 8 weeks have passed since I last sat down to write in this journal. I only kept keeping this because my therapist, a cute 30-something redhead, insisted I do so. My memory has been slipping away piece by piece. Parts of weeks are gone. Plans I've made suddenly lose their spot at the forefront of my mind. I started considering trying to do dream recollection and other methods to try and help sharpen my memory, but I can't even remember if I dream anymore or not. Had it been summer already? Where had the days gone? I was still experiencing PTSD from the following event that I accounted for in my journal. Here is what I wrote. It was the very end of spring. I remember it like it was yesterday. I moved to Pittsburgh from San Antonio nearly 6 months prior. Adjusting to the move and my new job as a chemist at the nuclear power facility out in Beaver County, I was still adjusting to things like the time change, the temperatures, although it had been an awfully pleasant spring thus far. That was all about to change, apparently. It was an average day in April. I'm not exactly sure of the date. It had been a Friday. I walked out of the security gates, collected my personal belongings that weren't allowed past security, and said my goodbyes to my coworkers. The sun was not even setting yet, a nice change from the cold, dark winters of the region. However, even today as I strode along the exposed parking lot, something felt off. It felt like 2 beady, yellow eyes were watching me. It was strange for me to suffer from paranoia, but I guess after bouts of insomnia due to a move, I had been more worse for wear than usual. As a chemist, my job really wasn't taxing or nerve-wracking. The added bonus of working on nuclear power was more of an excitement than deterrent to me, as these facilities were incredibly safe by now. To top it off, Pittsburgh was in a well-shielded region safe from the Midwest plains wrought with tornadoes. As well, the nearest fault line was the New Madrid, and it had been relatively inactive in recent times. So outside of human error, I really did not have much to worry about, and let's face it, humans didn't really even run these plants anymore. They were entirely digital. I unlocked my Ford F-150. I had recently picked it up to contend with the rugged terrain I'd constantly face while hiking in the summer months. As I unlocked it and prepared to open the handle, I thought I heard footsteps somewhere a few cars behind me shuffling quickly. This, on top of the feeling I was being watched, made me finally turn around to confront whoever was trying to prank me. "All right," I half shouted. "I hear you back there. Who is that? Frank? Monty? Oliver?" Frank was a systems specialist. He was your typical blue-collared, football and beer-loving 54-year-old. Monty was a Frenchman here to do work as an exchange program with Électricité de France. Oliver was a quiet, 20-something software engineer, and despite his shy, introverted nature, once you got to know him, you uncovered a remarkable sense of humor and dry sarcasm. A very bright kid. I had been in my field for over 20 years, working on projects ranging from cancer drug trials to less legal chemical concoctions. I laid my first LSD tabs at 19 years old in the darkroom of the photography lab at the University of Texas. It was a wild ride, those days, but I had since settled down and had made myself more than I could have hoped for insofar as my career and life. Things had been great. "Come on, guys, this isn't funny." I snapped back from my thoughts on my coworkers and just realized that nobody had answered me. Strange, I thought. Surely this was some kind of joke. Maybe I had been awake too long. My brain wasn't making the connection that a pile of leaves could have blown across the parking lot. And here I am, standing here, looking like a crazy person, shouting at someone that wasn't there. I chuckled to myself and turned to my truck, climbing in it, but still not able to shake the sense that someone or something was watching me. I turned the keys to the ignition, and the roar of the engine helped drown out the nervous silence that surrounded the nearly empty parking lot. I took off, not wanting to look back in fear that I might actually see my phantom pursuer. As I drove away, the feeling intensified, and as it did, the accelerometer needle crept higher and higher as I sped home. The lock to my front door turned and the door swung open as I walked into the entryway and let out a long sigh of relief. Home. Home was a small ranch house in an outlying township of Allegheny County, the county that Pittsburgh is located in, directly southwest of the city. I could be to the various entertainment and sporting events in less than 15 minutes. On the other hand, I could escape to wild and wonderful West Virginia in about a half hour. It was a much better balance than the hot streets of San Antonio and the even hotter surrounding deserts. My ranch had 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths, a nice sit-down kitchen with an island and a smart fridge, a connected dining room and adjoining living room. With no upstairs, I slept, worked, ate, and bathed all on the same floor. I had laundry and laundry chute in the basement, as well as an additional TV and futon for guests who had maybe had one too many drinks at my place. I hadn't thrown a party yet, but now that I had begun to get to know my coworkers, I was planning on it soon. I checked the back door, which lead off my dining room, and looked into my backyard. Nothing, just a white fenced-in yard, surrounded by overgrown vines and trees in the connecting yards. Behind the fence and directly behind my house was a vacant lot, and on the other side of that woods that stretched all the way down to Washington County. So, in essence, nothing. If anything were to happen, it would have probably been traveling for miles. I thought to myself, by the time it gets here from Washington, it's just going to want to take a nap. I plopped down on the sofa in my living room, mouth half ajar as I prepared to slumber off for the night and the weekend to come. The TV turned on as I flipped the remote and turned to one of the local news channels. I had caught the story just in time, as the anchor feverishly scoured through the teleprompter. Reports have been sporadic and sketchy from various residents in the area, but one eyewitness had this to say. I gulped, thinking back to the feeling of being watched in the parking lot, as a man in a John Deere hat, with a beer belly and wife beater took frame in the camera. He began to speak to the off-screen reporter saying, "Alls I know is it was big. It had these sharp, white teeth, and when it saw you it would hiss like a rabid, wild animal. But it walked upright, you know? Like it was a man, but it definitely ain't no man. It was furry, almost like it had a full coat of a bear, or a black bear, but it definitely ain't no bear. I got my shotgun from the porch, but when I came back yonder, thing done up and had split." The reporter interjected, "Did you hear it growl or snort or anything?" "Yes'm, I suppose I did. It was hissing, but it ain't like no hiss I ain't never hear, you know. It showed dim, pearly sharp teeth done split up and vanish into thin air." The uneducated response was kind of humorous, but I wasn't really in a laughing mood at this point. "How did you know it was out here?" Obviously a pre-canned question by the reporter, as it rolled off the tongue perfectly in the next breath. "You see, that's the weird thing. I'm not sure what it was you call it, some sort of sixth sense or something, but I just felt like there was something out there." I told my wife, "Hey, wait, there's something out down yonder in the yard." My heart dropped and I changed the channel immediately. Shivers ran up and down my spine, as I just knew, that I had been an experiencer of whatever this was. I debated calling into the news story and sharing my experience, but didn't want to even bother. This had been the stuff they wrote about in those kooky UFO books, or the weird Bigfoot books. Someone had just felt it. And if that didn't discredit me, I don't know what would. I'd be 58, trying to sell a copy of a book of the day I got spooked, desperately giving cryptozoological talks at conferences of weirdos and crazy people alike. I dropped that real quick and decided it was time for a movie. I flipped through the Netflix selections, still unimpressed at the streaming service. Nothing new, nothing good. Just the same old TV show selections, mostly from the 80s and 90s, and C-grade movies. Snap. I jumped up from my sofa, immediately clutching my Galaxy S5 and activating the flashlight switch. It was about 8 p.m. when the twig snapped out my dining room window, which I had opened to let the cool breeze in. A sense of dread and fear overwashed me. I should have called the damn news station and had them send a crew out. I could have got them on camera. I could have been the hero who killed whatever this thing was. Footsteps. One heavy, one softer, one heavy, one softer. They stop. I slowly crept towards the window, keeping low, almost like you do in one of those Call of Duty video games, so as not to make any noise in my house and tip off my position. This was it, I thought to myself. I was going to do something heroic finally. I was going to be a part of something extraordinary. The footsteps started again, this time receding back towards the fence, but again they stopped only after a few steps. I heard this hiss the man had described earlier as I slowly crept up to the window. There was a switch to the spotlight to my backyard, just between the door to the patio and my window. I quickly lunged for it, not wasting a second, and light flooded the backyard. I gasped in horror as my face squared with the window. Staring straight at me were two sickly, yellow eyes with black pupils and no iris I could see. The thing was walking upright, but it was covered in a silky, brown fur. It was looking straight at me. Obviously the light was flooding it so it couldn't see too well onto my patio. I doubt it saw me. I doubt it saw me at all. It quickly hopped over the fence, and I heard the footsteps, both now heavy, padding into the darkness. I sat by my window for the remainder of the night, with the light on. I had nothing but a kitchen knife and baseball bat at my disposal, but it never came back. The sun rose, and I ventured outside to investigate the footprints. Nothing. There was nothing even out here. I walked back inside and turned on the news to get an update. Nothing? No follow-up? I checked the websites. No reports, not even a recap. Wait, what? Had this actually happened? Was this real? When was the last time I slept? I couldn't even recall anymore. I swear, there had been something out there. That's where I ended it. Now it's been a long time since this happened. But since then, I swear every night, I hear something walking around my backyard. But every time I go to look, there is nothing there. It's been happening more frequently, almost as if it's getting ready for something. I'm still suffering from insomnia, and I can't help but get the feeling now that we're approaching an important event. An important event in my life that is going to define who I am for the remainder of it. I just wish I knew what it was. Second story. My husband developed an extreme version of werewolf syndrome. My husband of 6 years, Troy, was diagnosed with hypertrichosis during the last leg of our marriage. If that particular disorder doesn't ring a bell, you may recognize it by its more colloquially friendly name of werewolf syndrome, due to the furry, lupin appearance it can give the afflicted. It's pretty rare, and it took us completely by surprise, given that no one in Troy's family ever had it. It turns out it can be acquired without a genetic predisposition. At first, it was a little funny. Thick, dark brown hair, distinct from Troy's normal dirty blonde hair and scraggly gingerish beard. began to sprout as luxurious mutton chops by his ears and along his cheekbones. He let it go for a bit, then shaved it all off once the Wolverine jokes got old. We didn't worry too much about it. It was strange, sure, but we figured it would be manageable. The hair grew back quickly, though, and the same dark, downy fuzz began to grow elsewhere on Troy's body. His shoulders, back, stomach, and perhaps most disturbingly, his palms and the soles of his feet. Once that began, the hair only seemed to grow faster, like overnight fast. After I woke up with some of his foot hair twisted around my ankle, I took Troy to see a doctor. It was the first time I'd seen Dr. Brighton, our family doctor of several years, appear to be shocked by anything. He did his best not to show it, which is exactly how I knew he was so disturbed. Dr. Brighton was usually warm and gregarious, and as soon as he saw Troy, I watched his face go carefully blank. "You rarely see hypertrichosis to this extent," he said as we consulted in his small, sterile office. "It's quite unmanageable." "He's growing hair back overnight," I answered, giving Troy a sideways glance. He was twirling a long lock of hair from his forearm with his index finger. I tried to keep from shuddering. "We've resorted to trimming it all as quickly as possible before bed. It's not really helping." "I see," Dr. Brighton said, jotting a note down on a clipboard. "Well, there are options, such as electrolysis or laser hair removal. My concern is the extent to which you would need such therapies. They can be expensive and sometimes painful, even for areas of minor concentration." He glanced at Troy, but his eyes didn't seem to want to linger long. He began writing again. "It's not that bad, honestly," Troy chimed in. "A little itchy at times, and yeah, I've gotten a lot of funny looks. Other than that, I don't know. I think I could live with it." "Well, that's the spirit," Dr. Brighton replied, though his eyes twitched to me briefly before they went back to Troy. "Just keep it all clean and dry, and I'm sure you'll be all right. If you ever want to seek out permanent treatment, I can give you some recommendations." "Thanks, Doc," Troy said, hopping off the examination table. "We'll let you know." A week later, Troy's body was absolutely covered in hair. It had to be a 1 in a zillion occurrence. Not even the most egregious case I could find pictures of on Google could compare. Troy wasn't all that shy about his appearance either, and insisted on accompanying me on even the most mundane of outings. News about his condition spread almost as quickly as the hair. There was an article in the local paper that dubbed him the city's own real-life Sasquatch, and after that, he was a minor celebrity. People stopped to ask for photos and requests for his best Wookiee impression. I found this all very hard to cope with. I loved my husband more than anything, but it was becoming too much. Being near him was like being around a perpetually damp, odorous dog. All that hair made him sweat, and by the end of the day, he smelled like the communal towel of a sauna frequented exclusively by 400-pound men. Needless to say, the one accommodation I asked him to make was to sleep separately from me. There was nothing less restful than lying next to the human equivalent of a yak. Troy had to stop working as things spiraled out of control. He spent most of his days sleeping on the couch and watching TV, content in his cocoon of hair. Meanwhile, I took on a second job to keep up with the mortgage and living expenses, including the increased cost of shears, shampoo, and other supplies. I would be exhausted and at the end of my rope after 2 shifts, all while hacking at a jungle of increasingly tangled and unruly hair. One night, while I was especially tired, I was trimming a wild mat on Troy's thigh, humming to keep myself awake. I had just snipped off a clump when I felt something creeping around my wrist. I screeched and yanked back when I noticed a twist of hair encircling my wrist and snaking up my forearm. "Ow! What the hell, Carrie?" Troy demanded. Why are you pulling? I wedged the trimming scissors under the hair and snipped it away. I watched as it receded like a wounded snake. Stunned, I took a step back. I'm totally losing my mind, Troy. I need to sleep. It's going to be even worse tomorrow if you don't finish, he warned. I stared at my hirsute husband. Troy, I don't think I can do this. I'm at my wit's end. Carrie, don't say that. I need you. In sickness and in health, remember? Let's talk about it tomorrow. I sighed with a shake of my head. Sorry, I'm just so tired. Troy was quiet for a moment as I swept the trimmings. Can I sleep in bed with you? He asked. I don't know. It's so hot with all the hair. Please, Carrie? It might be the last time. His words tugged my heartstrings, and the desperate look in his eyes did the rest. My throat felt dry and strained at the thought of lying next to him, but I nodded anyway. I was too tired to argue. I helped Troy up the stairs into our bedroom. I got under the covers, while he laid on top, having his own natural blanket of sorts. He drifted off quickly with gentle snores, and I turned away, curling up to be as far away from him as possible. With the thought of the retreating, worm-like hairs and a final disturbed shiver, I too fell asleep. I had wretched dreams of a deep, dark jungle with slithering, living vines that ensnared me. They dragged me into a fetid swamp where an alligator lay in wait to snap and crunch off each of my limbs, one by one. Just as the monster was about to go for my head, I gasped myself awake. I thought the nightmare itself had awoken me, but it wasn't that. It was the pain from the loss of circulation in my arms and legs. I pulled and flailed, my limbs meeting resistance, and was finally able to thrust the covers down to my midsection. I saw with horror that my arms had been bound tightly with thick ropes of Troy's hair. With no way to free myself, I began to panic. Troy, I hissed, beating down the desire to scream. Wake up, you have to help me. Troy stirred without opening his eyes. What's wrong? He mumbled. Your hair is tangled all over me. I need you to get it off. Oh, sorry about that, he responded. I felt the hair restraining me begin to shift and release, falling away from my body, harmless as ribbons. Oh my God, I gasped, scrambling out of bed and backing away. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. What? Troy asked, more annoyed than alarmed. He'd finally opened his eyes, and that's when I began to scream. Thready patches of hair had sprouted from the whites of his eyes. They wriggled and floated like tentacles while he looked at me. When he blinked, the hairs seemed to curl and retract under his eyelids. That's it, I shrieked, dressing frantically. I have to leave. I can't take it anymore. Carrie, don't. We can figure it out. I'll see Dr. Brighton again. I'll start treatment. I promise. Troy, I don't think you have hypertrichosis. Whatever you have, it's much worse. I'm sorry. I grabbed an overnight bag from our closet and began shoving everything I could find into it. I have to go. I started for the bedroom door, but thick tendrils of hair suddenly whipped out and wrapped firmly around my waist, pulling me back. Don't leave, Carrie. Troy pleaded. I can't do this alone. The rope around my waist squeezed uncomfortably, and I lost my wind for a second. I didn't have anything to cut it away and was getting scared. I took a second to calm myself before speaking again. Okay, I'll stay. Just let me go grab the scissors, and I'll be back in a minute. I'll call off of work, and we'll try and sort this out. Troy's hair fell from my waist. He appeared mostly placated, but that appearance was betrayed when he used his hair to lift the overnight back out of my reach. Promise? Of course, I said, Smiling with trembling lips, he let me go. I went downstairs calmly, picked up the scissors, then my keys and my cell phone, and bolted out the front door. I heard Troy's yells even as I was starting my car. I screeched out of the driveway and took off without ever looking in the rearview mirror. I never stepped foot into that house again. I fled to my home state of Illinois, where my parents still resided. They took back their 35-year-old daughter with grace and love, which helped my mental state tremendously. I blocked Troy's number and deleted the voicemails I received from Dr. Brighton. After a couple of months of living at home, I had no idea what had become of Troy, and that was exactly how I preferred it. My wedding ring was banished to a safety deposit box and all but forgotten. Half a year after leaving, I had a good job again and rented my own apartment. I mostly avoided developing friendships or romantic interests. I didn't need the complication of others asking about my past personal life, dredging up old horrors. I did, however, adopt a very sweet and companionable mutt named Archer. We kept life simple, and sometimes the nightmare of Troy faded into the background of my memory. There, but not all-consuming. That all changed yesterday. I was rudely awoken at 3 a.m. by a cacophony consisting of my phone ringing and Archer barking like a rabid hound. Groggily, I sat up and picked up my cell. It was Dr. Brighton calling. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Carrie," the doctor said, his tone steady and serious. "I hope this message finds you well. I just wanted to let you know something. I went to visit Troy earlier today, and he wasn't at the house. He'd been threatening to find you for a while, but I didn't think it was physically possible for him to leave the house at this point." There was a brief pause. "Look, keep your head on a swivel, Carrie. He comes from a place of love, but, well, just be safe. He's changed quite a lot. Call me back if you need anything, and take care of yourself." The message ended, and I put down the phone, first grabbing the scissors I always kept on the nightstand. I left the bedroom to go check on Archer. He was standing in the hallway, his little black and gray speckled body pointed directly at the front door. He was growling, low and long, with raised hackles. A mass of thin, dark tendrils was poking in through the cracks of the doorframe, creeping over the door and across the hardwood as an alien mass. Archer snapped at it, but a few strands got hold of his front paw and began to drag him forward. He yelped, sliding on the floor as he tried to get away. "Don't you fucking touch my dog." I screamed and lunged at the hair to hack at it with the scissors. Once freed, Archer ran behind me, whimpering. From somewhere far off, I thought I heard a yell, and I noticed something extremely disturbing from the clippings on the floor. They were leaking small amounts of what appeared to be blood. The hairs I'd cut curled and retreated back through the door like wounded creatures. I would like to say that I considered the pain I would cause the former love of my life before I cut anymore. But that would be a lie. With a guttural cry, I began hacking relentlessly at the invading strands like a deranged barber, and again heard distant sounds of anguish. The remaining hair disappeared quickly after my attack, and I was left staring at the mess of trimmings and red stains, shocked beyond reason. I stayed up, on watch for any further intrusion, with Archer by my side the entire time. When day broke, I went to the police station to file a formal restraining order against Troy. Of course, omitting the part about the supernatural control he had over his own hair. I think Archer and I will move again soon. It's probably a stalemate at this point, given that I now know that Troy's strength is also his weakness, but I'm not taking any chances. In the meantime, I've spent most of a paycheck on the sharpest shears I can find, and a whole shelf's worth of Nair. Troy, if by some chance you read this, I have one message for you. Find me again, and I won't hold back. I'm ready for you, you hairy bastard. Third story. My dad's werewolf story. My dad has told me this story countless times since I was only but a little boy. My dad had just met my mother, and they happily married each other. Since going into the military was necessary back in the day, he had to leave my pregnant mother all alone at home with my grandma. I'm going to skip the part about his stay there to the werewolf part. It was somewhere around midnight. Everyone at camp was sleeping except the guards, him and some random guy. Just as the guards were changing shifts, some of the guard dogs were being attacked by a tall figure, and all that could be heard was a sound of chewing, dogs being torn apart, and loud barking. All the guards had a chill down their spine and had really big fear instilled inside them. They were all too afraid to check what is going on, so they were all hiding, waiting for the end to what was currently going on. After the apparent turn of events, the guards went to check what might have happened. They were shocked once they had found two of the dogs, torn apart, eaten, and the whole place being a mess of organs and torn off dog skin. One of the guards had vomited and started crying. The other was gazing at the scene, while fear tearing him from the inside. He tried keeping his cool and went on to comfort the other guard. The other dogs were visibly scared and were all covered in blood, but one of them seemed to have bit the werewolf and had blood on its mouth. However, no one knew that it didn't bite a dog, but something else. Something much bigger. After what had happened, everyone was alerted about the situation and were told their camp will be moving to another one in approximately 2 or 3 days. Everyone was afraid, and a lot of the soldiers were scared of the recent event. At one point, my dad had to be a guard, so he was doing his shift. He was obviously very afraid and didn't want to do this, but he still did it 'cause he had to. This time everyone was wary about the 2 half-eaten dog corpses, and everyone thought that one of the dogs, the pit bull, went berserk since it wasn't fed much, had gone on to eat the other dogs, while some thought other dumb ideas like the rake eating them. However, that wasn't the case. It was put down and almost everyone thought everything was fine. While he was guarding around, the same thing as last night was going on, but this time he ran there. As he had an AK-47, he wasn't afraid to attack it. By the time he was there, the figure was standing tall where the guard dogs were kept and were eating away. My dad froze in fear and didn't move, while the furry, tall figure with its snout and mouth covered in blood had turned its head around and stared at him with its glowing, hollow eyes. After that, it seemingly had jumped about 20 feet away, then ran away. After that, it was never seen again. Everyone at camp was shocked, and they had to move their camp from its current location to one whole 2 towns away. The only reason this hasn't spread out and the media hasn't caught on it was because our country is very poor, so it made sense for there to be no cameras. The story may sound fake, but my dad had explained it in such vivid detail that I just can't help but think it's real. Hope this was worth sharing. Fourth story. I'm an American werewolf hunter. My name is Boston Murphy, and I kill werewolves for the U.S. government. I didn't join the army to get medals or to have a statue in my honor. I joined it to simply get away from my family. My father is okay, but his new wife's the most evil person you could have the misfortune of meeting. She used to constantly berate me, calling me less than dirt and a waste of space. I tried telling Dad, but he didn't believe it, or chose not to believe it. I joined the army when I was 17. It was the only way of getting away from the verbal abuse. Stepmom couldn't be happier that I was finally out of her house, but Dad was crushed. He understood why I chose to do it, but he still felt like it was his fault. It was shipping out day, and he gave me an emotional send-off. It was time to start my own life. I arrived to Fort Bronson by Thursday. I still remember having goosebumps arriving. This was it. I was really doing this. No turning back now. Fort Bronson was a massive base, expanding over 60 acres. The bus stopped, and drill instructor Haymeyer walked on board, gracing us with his hospitality. "Attention, you piss cans. I'm Instructor Haymeyer. I'll be your friend for the next 18 weeks. Now get your sorry asses off my bus and get checked in. Do I make myself clear?" "Sir, yes, sir," we all shouted in unison. We got our bags and got off the bus. Since I was sitting in the very back, I was the last one to leave. Haymeyer looked at me and stopped me. "What's your name, cadet?" he asked. "B. Boston Murphy, sir." I replied, nervous. He looked me up and down, muttering to himself, "You're not going with them. You're going to Special Assignment Ward." Haymeyer said, "I haven't been here more than 10 minutes, and I'm already getting a special assignment." "Where is that, sir?" I asked. "In the room next to the mess hall, in the north building." "Now get the hell off my bus," Haymeyer replied. I quickly got my bags and left. The north building was the farthest building on base, away from everyone else. The sun was furious that day. I was sweating hard. Yet I walked at a brisk pace. All I know, it could be the first test. I entered the building. The air conditioning inside greeted me like an old friend. The place was a maze of stairs and hallways. I had to use my map. The mess hall was located on the second hallway. I climbed the stairs, carrying my luggage with me. This building seemed less maintained than the other buildings, but who am I to judge? As I approached the mess hall, I turned to the door to the left. It looked like a janitor's closet. It had a faded "Special Assignments" sticker on the door. I opened it. A rush of old, musty air ambushed my nose. Once inside, I walked down a long hallway. There was no paint on the walls. It was gray. The fluorescent lights shined bitterly. Through a pair of double doors, I entered a waiting room. The place was empty. Only a receptionist and another cadet populated the place. I went to the receptionist. "Name, please," she said. "Boston Murphy," I replied. She checked her notes, sighing. "I don't see you in my notes. You must be new." "Why, yeah. Instructor Haymeyer sent me here," I said, sweating. She dialed a number on her phone, motioning me to take a seat. I did what she asked. The other cadet in the room was a skinhead called James. "You new here too, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, man," I replied. "Me too. I was so ready to kick some jihadi ass, but I'm here instead. You feel me?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied. The truth was that I didn't join to kill. I was hoping to be a medic or something. "My name's James. What's yours?" he asked. "Boston," I replied. "You seem cool, Boston. Personally, I hope this was a mistake. I want to hit the range and make those bastards pay for 9/11. James said. "Cadet James Fillmore." The receptionist said, "I guess that's my K. See ya, brother," James said, patting my back. I waited to be called in, watching videos on my phone. The receptionist on the phone looked at me every so often, whispering. After what seemed like centuries, I was finally called up. The receptionist told me to go through the double doors and into the first door on the right. I walked through, luggage in hand. The hallway I walked in was small and dark. The door on the right said, "Lycanthropy Extermination with Greg Romero." Lycanthropy, like in Werewolves? This had to be a joke. Surely Haymeyer played a prank on me, testing how gullible new recruits are. I looked further down the hall. It only got weirder from there. Wendigo Extermination with Susan Fletcher. Thunderbird Extermination with Otto Haymeyer. Zombie Extermination with Tony Stevenson. I had half a mind to walk out and confront Haymeyer, but something told me that he didn't appreciate being called a liar. Despite my doubts, I walked in. Inside, it looked like a regular classroom, having desks and such. James was sitting in the back while I sat near the front. "Hey, Boston, small world, am I right?" he asked. "I suppose," I replied. I sat down, and a man started speaking. "Welcome, cadets, I'm Greg Romero, and for the next 18 weeks, I'll teach you how to dispatch a Lycanroc," Mr. Romero said. James raised his hand. "Aren't werewolves fake, though?" he asked. "I wish they were fake, but no, they're not. Lycanrocs pose a serious threat to livestock and humanity as a whole," Mr. Romero replied. I raised my hand. "Where's the rest of the class?" I asked. Romero sighed. "We're not as popular as Wendigo Extermination, but hopefully we'll receive more recruits next year." Romero showed a photo of a mutilated woman being eaten by a werewolf. I gagged. "We have a thankless job, gentlemen. Only 2 people know we exist, and that's the 2 of you. Who wants to kill a wolf?" Romero asked. We both shouted in unison. For the next 18 weeks, I was taught how to kill a wolf. Silver does kill one, but instead of a crossbow, I got a Mini 14 with silver bullets. I was trained how to track wolves and how to survive in the wild. It was hard at first, but I got the hang of it. On graduation day, I was so happy. James and I got drunk at his place. At first, I didn't like James, but during training, we became friends. I was deployed to Arizona, of all places. The assignment was simple. An elderly Lycanroc was spotted in the area, and I had to dispatch him. I had to cut off its right hand as proof and return it to my bosses. I was getting paid $100,000 for this. Since I was new, this assignment was sort of a test to see if I have what it takes. I arrived to Ground Zero, a campsite. The brass in Washington were nice enough to close its surrounding area, so nobody could get hurt. I looked for clues, only to find a patch of hair. It smelled like piss, meaning that a wolf was nearby. The hair led deep into the brush, into the desert. The sun was angry that day. It cooked my skin under all my armor. It led to an abandoned farmhouse, but any sign of a farm was dried up a long time ago. I crept to a window, rifle in hand. I peeked, and not only did I see the wolf, but there was also 2 little wolves, seemingly surrounding him. "Come on, Grandpa, let's go play," one of the little ones said, nibbling on the big one's ear. "In a while, kids, I have to rest," he replied. My hands were shaking. Sweat dripped from my brow. I had to do this. I was getting paid to. I took a deep breath, then I kicked down the door. I opened fired, shooting the big one in the chest 4 times, sending him backwards. The kids looked on in horror, screaming and crying. I brought out my axe and hacked off his right hand. I placed it in my bag, the puppies still crying. "Shut your fucking mouths," I yelled, pointing my rifle at them. They only screamed louder. I panicked. I didn't want to fail my first mission. I did what I had to. I shot the puppies, hitting them both in the head. I hacked off their right hands, putting them in my bag. Once the adrenaline died, I threw up. What's done is done. I can't fix it. I had $300,000 in my bag, softening the blow. I returned to my boss and gave them the hands. They were surprised to say the least. "Damn, not only did you take out that old fuck, but you popped his grandkids too. You're the best exterminator we ever had. No mercy. I'm gonna call you Eisner from now on, okay?" My boss said, signing me a check. It was from the United States Treasury, $300,000. I placed the money in my bank account when I got home. Before I left, my boss said, "Your new assignment is to dispatch wolf pups spotted in Alaska, but I don't think that would be a problem for you, Eisenerv." He winked. It made me sick. I reloaded my silver ammo, bought some beef jerky, and flew to Alaska. A logger found a wolf pup hanging out around the woods near his house and locked it in his shed. I told him to stay back, in case it got aggressive. I went in, closing the door behind me. Huddled in the corner, I saw 4 wolf pups. They looked scared. I wasn't proud of what happened next. I fired, and I took their hands. I returned to my boss and turned in the hands. He gave me $400,000 this time. Eisenherv, you're making your country safer every time you go out. You're a hero, son. He said. I don't feel like a hero, sir. I replied. Just know this, they're monsters. They don't know right from wrong. All they know is killing. Take 2 months off, then come back, okay? He said, sending me off. I still don't feel like a hero. 5th story. The Werewolf Hunter. It all started 4 days ago. My job had just let me go because I was too slow at putting peppers on a freaking conveyor belt. So it was back to the hell that was job searching. 3 applications a day, keeping an eye out for responses, and in general just hanging with my parents that I could tolerate some days better than others. I honestly don't know what made me think of applying for that specific gas station. Don't get me wrong, I really do like the place and I don't blame it for what happened. So I won't use the real name in this story. Let's call it Swift Pit instead. The gas station was family-owned. Let's call them the Leica family. That has a nice ring to it. Mrs. Leica was a kind, short lady with gray hair, blue eyes, and a very gentle voice. $13 an hour sure felt like one hell of a deal for just running the register, filling the hot food section, and keeping the shelves stocked. And the other workers were nice, which was more than I could have said for my last job. I don't think I need to describe what it looked like to you, because it's pretty much the same as any other gas station. There were 4 pumps. The store itself was pretty small, but not so small it felt claustrophobic. During the day, they kept the hot food area well stocked, but during the night, we kept only the bare minimum there, replacing it only when the initial ones were taken. The evenings were so slow they'd only put 1 person in the station, though the boss lived perhaps 10 minutes away and would be able to show up pretty quickly if I gave her a call. Not sure how the days went, though since they were still in business, I've got to assume quite a bit busier. I heard that they were toying with closing during the night to help save on expenses. It was my first night by myself. Nothing too eventful happened for the first few hours. I could have counted the number of customers that actually entered the station so far on one hand. One was a short old woman with a loud set of pipes. Another was a man who really shouldn't have been driving from how badly he reeked of alcohol. There might have been a few more customers. It's a little fuzzy now. I spent a lot of time just standing at the register and staring out the window. I always grew up near cities, where you could only see the brightest stars. It really wasn't until I got this job, a few minutes away from the nearest city, that I really got to see the night sky in all of its glory. That night was no exception. The full moon was just breathtaking. I could have stood there and watched the stars for hours. It was around 1 o'clock when I heard the gunshot, and it was close, really close. The entire night went into a panic. I heard startled birds flying for safety, watched a single deer sprint past the building. Then it was quiet, the night itself patiently waiting for an explanation. But I didn't have one. There was a huge forest nearby, sure. Perhaps a hunter? I don't know the first thing about hunting. Maybe someone was allowed to hunt on this property. I was straining my ears when there was a loud clunk by the door. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. It was an adult wolf, who had one paw lightly stuck in the handle to pull it open. All it took was the wolf making a little jump backwards, and the door swung open. And for just a moment I realized the wolf had gained entry, and I was very possibly in danger. The wolf threw something into the store and took off into the night, all within the span of a few seconds. It was all so fast. But it was what the wolf had just flung into the building that really had me shocked. It was a small bundle of gray fur, looking at me with big brown eyes. I couldn't understand what I had just witnessed. Had an adult wolf just thrown its baby into the gas station in bail? That didn't make any sense. The little wolf looked outside, then hobbled its way towards me without a second thought. I was still thinking about it when someone stormed into view. They were wearing a huge trench coat, a very heavy set of jeans, some steel-toed boots, and a thick pair of gloves, along with a heavy-looking hat. But what really had me scared was the huge gun the man was holding. It was some sort of rifle, and even without knowing anything about guns, I recognized it as a heavy-caliber gun. The man was walking towards the entrance to the gas station, and while I couldn't see his eyes, I got the feeling he was looking right at me. By the time he got to the entrance, the young pup was out of sight, and the man's attention was grabbed when the adult wolf howled somewhere off in the distance. The man immediately turned and ran towards the sound, his gun at the ready. I didn't know what to think about the whole situation. I've heard of plenty of people hunting deer, but I didn't even know if it was legal for people to hunt wolves. I also didn't know how smart wolves were. But here was a parent wolf not only playing decoy to protect its cub, it even knew how to work the gas station's pull door with no trouble whatsoever. I've had some dogs that figured out that kind of stuff, sure, but that was only after several hundred attempts. And if the wolf was that crafty, I got the feeling the man stood no chance of killing it. My thoughts turned to the cub when I felt it nuzzling against my feet. It only took one look down before I knelt down and began petting it. I've always liked dogs and kids, so a 2-in-1 package combo was an absolute delight. It took me a second to remember that it was a wild wolf cub. This whole situation was just so weird. The poor thing was shaking like a leaf. Somewhere in the back of my mind I was wary. Even a fully tamed dog is likely to lash out at a person if it is approached when scared. But that part of my mind wasn't the one in control as I gently clutched the cub close to my chest. There. It's okay. I won't let the mean hunter hurt you. The wolf looked up at my face, then, to my delight, snuggled close to my chest. Good. There was nothing to worry about. But it was strange. As far as I know, most wild animals are scared to be around people. This pup was scared, sure, but had no problem whatsoever with me. Did it realize I wanted to help it? I don't know. Would that be a bit too smart for a wolf cub? It didn't take long before I realized I had to call someone. Even if the poor cub was someone's pet, that meant that someone was missing their pet and probably looking for it. The only person who lived close enough that it even seemed plausible would be the manager. I hated the idea of waking her up at 1 a.m., but I really wasn't sure what to do about the situation. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Unlike the gentle voice I was expecting to come out from the phone, I heard a gruff and decidedly male voice grumble its way through the receiver. Yeah. Hi. I'm looking for Mrs. Leica. There's something odd going on at the gas station and dash. My wife's sleeping right now, asshole. I'm going to have to do. Well, this was off to a great start. I've never been the best at conversing with people, and I honestly hadn't realized she was married. Okay. I heard a gunshot nearby. It took the man the longest time to reply, and when he did, I was startled at how nervous he sounded. All of that annoyance was gone, replaced with genuine fear in his voice. Is that so? Are you in danger? Not that I know of yet. I did see some weirdo in a trench coat carrying a rifle walking around outside, but they left after hearing a wolf howl. Shit. You, didn't happen to see if there was a wolf with a cub nearby, did you? Well, that was suspiciously specific. I'm not stupid, and that was setting off red flags in my head. It took nearly 10 seconds before I decided the only rational answer was that the Leica family owned a few tame wolves. Yes, actually. The wolf kind of threw the cub into the gas station. I'm currently holding the cub right now. Okay, phew. Actually, first I'm going to question why the hell you would pick up a wild wolf cub. You do know mother wolves aren't very forgiving if they see you playing with their kids, right? That made me blush. He wasn't wrong, of course. If I was a normal person, maybe I would have thought through it a little bit harder. I like dogs. A lot. Fair enough. Anyways, I've heard about this nutcase on the news recently. Apparently, he comes out every full moon and starts shooting at any wolves he sees. I'm going to grab my gun and meet you at the gas station, just in case he decides to do something. As for the cub, well, you seem to have that under control right now. Also, this may be a strange thing to ask, but could you please not call the police? I mean, if the situation gets really bad, then go right ahead, but so long as it's just weird like this. I agreed with him, my throat becoming very dry. More red flags were going off. He knew more than what he was letting on. I could sense it. This whole situation screamed trouble. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the clock. 1:15. Now, before I continue, I want it on record that I'm not always the best when it comes to putting things together. But it doesn't take a fucking genius to figure out the connection between wolves and the full moon. Of course, I thought werewolf at some point during this conversation. It would definitely explain some nut marching around the woods, killing every wolf he came across. At the time, I thought this gunman was probably just some deluded psycho who believed in fairy tales a little too much. As I waited for Mr. Leica to appear, I couldn't stop the thoughts gnawing away at my brain. Why on earth had the man asked about a wolf and her cub? My more creative side that likes to ignore reality played with the thought that perhaps this mother wolf and child were in fact not only werewolves, but family members to Mr. Leica. I've always had an overactive imagination, and it's gotten me in trouble more than once. And tonight, faced with a mystery that the rational side of my brain had no answer to, the creative side was all too willing to spin a fantastical story of lies, murder, and love. Though, of course, the rational side was keeping it in check. The fantasies I was cooking up were nothing more than fantasies. Werewolves were not real. The entire time my brain was, thinking this up, I was playing with the cub. For the first few minutes I just stood there and petted the cub, but then we got bored of that and I decided to see if it could play fetch with a nearby pencil. The answer, to my delight, was yes. Somewhere in the middle of this, I started calling the cub Togo, which he seemed to love. Belly rubs were one of his favorite things, so I started rewarding him with a belly rub every time he brought back the pencil. It felt like forever before my mind noticed that there was something heading our way. I could hear it. Some soft, thumping sound. It made me feel uneasy, and I quickly had the cub sit at my feet while I stood up at the register, the cub well hidden from the doorway. It only took a few seconds before I saw the man wearing a trench coat walk into view. The man grunted as he took a step into the store, his large boots producing an audible thump with every step. His eyes checked out the right side of the store, then the left side of the store, before deciding it was safe to walk inside. In his left hand was the gun. "Sorry to disturb you, lad." There was no sincerity in his voice, but it was deep, perhaps the deepest sounding voice I had ever heard before. And as he walked in the store, I had the pleasure of realizing the man was taller than me, which, considering I'm 6 feet 3 inches, is actually quite the feat. It wasn't just a little bit either. He could have been 7 feet tall. It would have been a lot more intimidating if he didn't look like some secret agent from a kid's cartoon attempting to blend in with society. But the gun was very real, and it was what I was mostly afraid of. Have you seen a wolf come by here lately? Rather tall, gray fur, blue eyes? I honestly told him no. I didn't get a good look at the adult wolf that came by earlier, and the cub had brown eyes. But the man gave another low grunt as he began sauntering his way over to me, his boots thumping the entire way. Well, what about a tiny wolf cub? Gray fur, brown eyes? I told him no, but even I knew full well it was pointless. I couldn't even maintain eye contact. His boots were getting on my nerves. I'm easily distracted by sound, and the thumping kept messing with my head. Really? Thump, thump. He was heading my way, a crooked smile on his face as he lightly lifted up his gun. I'm not really in the mood for games, kid. Thump, thump. My throat was dry as a desert as I asked him why he wanted to know. Thump, thump. The moon's full and there are wolves about. Do I need to spell this out for you? Thump, thump. Are you trying to tell me they are werewolves? The man congratulated me on figuring it out, his voice soaked in sarcasm. I could feel Togo shivering against my feet, doing his best to stay out of sight of this man. And in that instant, I felt a rush of paternal instincts kicking in. He was not getting Togo, no matter what he thought. Werewolves don't exist, sir. The thumping stopped, because he was now on the other side of the counter, and his eyes, a deep shade of blue, were trying to bore a hole right through my skull. I don't really have time to explain the situation to you, so let's just settle with yes, they are. Give me one reason to believe you. He lifted his gun slightly with a stone-cold frown on his face. He didn't aim it at me or anything, but the threat was clear. It was quite the experience. I've never felt a chill down my spine quite like that before. He really was crazy, and he was dead serious. Werewolves do exist. I've seen what they can do, what they are. They cause nothing but pain and misery. Now tell me where the cub is. I didn't want to hand any living thing to this psychopath. The little cub was huddled around my feet, shivering so badly that it almost felt like it was having a seizure. But at the same time, well, he was pretty much telling me he'd shoot me if I didn't tell him. And if he did, Togo would be easy pickings. There was a moment, a truly horrible moment, where I honestly believed there was no other choice. I was going to have to reach down, pick up the innocent pup, and place it within this monster's hands. Then reality struck me. Mr. and Mrs. Laika lived only 10 minutes away, and a quick glance at the clock told me I had made that call about 12 minutes ago. Help was only a few minutes, maybe even just a few seconds away. If I could just stall for time. He wouldn't try anything if there was someone with equal firepower on the scene, right? What will you do? Kill it? Not immediately, no. You see, its mother is proving to be quite the difficult catch, not letting me get a clear shot. Good. He's talking. I just need to keep him talking. Okay. He gives a very irritated grunt as he shakes his head. God, are you really this retarded? I'm going to use it as bait. Retarded. Oh, he just struck a nerve. But it also told me just how agitated he was. Did he know I was stalling for time? Why the hell did I think this was a good idea a few seconds ago? Let's say that werewolves exist. How do you know these two are werewolves? Let's put it this way. Wolves are smart, but they're not this smart. The mother wolf realized I was tracking her after I failed to ambush her. What did she do? She ran up to the gas station, and a few minutes later I realized she must have brought her pup inside. She then tried to lead me away from the gas station. That's quite a bit of thought for a normal wolf. Okay, I had to give him that point. But the more I thought about it, the more this man's plan made me scared of him. He wanted to use a child to lure their mother into a trap, then kill the child. It was disgusting. Did you see the mother doing something wrong? I beg your pardon? Well, I'm assuming you have a reason you want to kill her. She's a werewolf. That was it. He made no other attempt to justify murdering what he fully believed was a sentient being. And he said it with such conviction, as if I was out of my mind to even think he needed more of a reason than that. It made my skin crawl. This guy was well on his way to becoming a serial killer. And if I kept attempting to stall him, I was starting to think I would become his first genuinely sentient victim. There was movement in my peripheral. A quick glance outside showed me that my salvation was just pulling into the parking lot. I've never been so happy to see a beat-up little Subaru. But when I looked back at the man, I realized I had made a horrible mistake. He was following my gaze, and the instant he saw the car outside, his mouth curled up into a nasty sneer. "You little shit." He raised the gun and aimed it at my chest. There was no hesitation. The sound was deafening. Pain tore a path through my chest. I staggered backwards while placing a shaking hand to my chest and held my hand up to find it covered in blood. He had actually shot me. I mean, it's one thing to threaten to shoot someone. It's quite another to actually do it. I should have fucking known. It felt like a dream as I looked up at him, to find him aiming the rifle at the doorway. Standing there was a burly man wielding a gun of his own, aiming it directly at the man in the trench coat. My breaths were slow and ragged, and I couldn't stop coughing. A few times I started coughing up blood. Mr. Leica and the man just stood there for the longest time, guns aimed at each other. At some point I fell to the ground. I don't think it had anything to do with the hole in my chest. I think it was just the shock of the entire situation. They started shouting at each other. I only needed to hear the first few sentences to realize they knew each other personally, and they despised each other. I tuned them out while reaching into my pocket and grabbing out my phone. It took only a few seconds to punch in the number and bring it to my ear. To my surprise, it hardly began the first ring before they picked up. The welcome sound of a friendly voice came through. 911, what's your Emmer dash? Bang. The sound was deafening. I heard the man's boots thundering towards the nearest aisle as all hell broke loose. Somewhere in my mind, I finally realized this was really happening. A gunfight was going on, right in front of me. I was shaking violently now, one hand clutching at the wound as I brought my knees to my chest and began whispering into the phone. "I'm at Swift Pit, the gas station. I was just shot." I couldn't hear her response over the gunfire, just the urgency in her voice. The guns sounded really different, with the man's making a loud bang and Mr. Leica's gun making a strange rat-a-tat sound, like it was firing 3 rounds at a time. Then it stopped. What followed was 5 minutes of silence, no one willing to make a single move. I was whispering to the operator, telling her everything I knew about the situation in a desperate hope that she'd have an answer as to what I should do. At some point I took off my shirt and tightly wrapped it around my chest in an attempt to slow the bleeding. And poor Togo was curled up next to me, crying silently as the world itself stood still. Rat-a-tat. Bang. My heart stopped as I heard a body fall to the floor. The man's gun fired last, not Mr. Leica's. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a dead man trigger finger? Thump. Thump. Oh no. Thump. Thump. He was heading my way. Thump. Thump. The young cub began whimpering. There was no point in trying to protect him anymore. I was about to die, and Togo was going to die right after. Thump. Thump. Time seemed to slow down as his boot came into view around the counter, landing with another loud thump. I looked up at him to see there were a few holes in his coat, but there was no blood. It took me a second to realize he was wearing a bulletproof vest underneath the trench coat. He had a nasty smile on his face as he rested the barrel of the gun right against my forehead. There was no hesitation, no guilt in his eyes. I could only watch, shaking my head pitifully and crying as I watched him pull the trigger. Click. The smirk vanished off of his face as he looked down at his gun with a raised eyebrow. Rat-a-tat. The sound couldn't have been more unexpected. The man's eyes opened wide in shock as he buckled at the knees, blood flowing freely from 3 bullet holes in his forehead. His head slammed into the floor with a nasty thunk. I heard pounding footsteps as Mr. Leica ran into view, pointing his gun at the man's head.
Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat.
It was only 10 seconds later, when it was clear the man was never going to get back up, that Mr. Leica turned around and looked at me. There was blood pouring out of a wound on his shoulder, but what really had me scared was the haunted look in his eyes as he got down to eye level with me, putting a hand on my shoulder. He looked me over and gave a huge, relieved sigh. I called 911. They're on the way. Good. Can you stand? It took a few attempts. My legs were shaking really badly, but I did ultimately stand. It took me a moment to realize Togo was standing in front of me, now nuzzling Mr. Leica's legs. He just reached down and picked Togo up and gently touched his head to Togo's forehead. The front door opened. At first I thought it was the police, but to my surprise I turned around to find the mother wolf now entering the gas station. She trotted up to us and waited for Mr. Leica to set down Togo, before gently picking up her cub and looking at me. The instant that her eyes met mine, there was a connection. I don't think I can fully explain how I knew her thoughts, but I knew exactly what she was saying to me, and I couldn't help the smile that came to my face as I scratched the back of her ear, even as the movement sent another wave of agony through my chest. "You're welcome." She smiled before turning around. Red and blue lights were shining through the windows, sirens blaring through the quiet night. Before I could say anything more, the wolf sprinted for the back door, knocked it open, and vanished into the night with her baby. The next few hours were a blur. The police asked a lot of questions, of course, but I didn't say much. The ambulance wasn't far behind them, and they put some endotracheal tube in my lung to help with my current breathing problems. The ambulance called the Leica family to inform them Mr. Leica was injured, but they didn't pick up. My family was a different matter. You'd have thought that I really had died from how badly Mom was crying, screaming that I was never to work at a gas station ever again. The doctors performed surgery on me within half an hour of me getting to the hospital. The bullet had gone through my lung and had nearly managed to exit through my back. It took a few stitches to close it all, but all in all I was assured my life wasn't in any danger due to the wound. I'm currently writing this from the hospital bed. This is the first day where I haven't had some damn reporter shoving a microphone down my throat, trying to get my opinion on the whole thing. Apparently the cameras in the station couldn't catch what was actually said. There was just footage of me playing with a wolf pup. Then the man came in and it all went as shit. I told them everything the man had said to me, how he was hunting werewolves, how he wanted to know where the cub was. Right now, the TV in my room is showing the headlines on the werewolf hunter, as they've named my attacker. As of right now, he's a John Doe. He didn't have a phone or any form of identification on him. Not a single person is missing from town, and not a single abandoned vehicle nearby. Police are awaiting news from a DNA test. But here's what really caught my attention. There are no stories of him from before that night. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, the actual news. I couldn't find anything, and I've had days to search. The closest I got was a man who swore werewolves existed and had killed his wife for thinking she was one, but he was several states away and was predictably in prison. I haven't told the police that Mr. Leica had warned me of this man, that he had heard stories of a man killing wolves during the full moon. As for the wolf and her cub, no one had an explanation for what happened. There were animal experts trying to figure out why a mother wolf would put her baby with a complete stranger, why the baby trusted me with no trouble, and why the mother simply took her child back without attempting to maul us. Some are accusing me of having illegally tamed the wolf, saying that it explained why I had refused to hand the pup over even with my life on the line. But others are defending me, saying that perhaps the wolf somehow realized I was protecting the child and pointing out that when the wolf opened the door, I was clearly alarmed until she left. In all honesty, I don't need an explanation. Mrs. Leica has come and visited me since then, looking at me with her piercing blue eyes and apologizing for everything that happened, promising to give me an explanation that I don't really need. She brought her son, not more than a year or two old and with big brown eyes. I had asked her for the boy's name, and she told me it was Sam. Then the child spoke, and while his mother thought it was just baby noises, it brought a smile to my face.